Good evening, everyone. My name is Melissa Raspberry, and I work for the American Institutes for Research, which has the great pleasure of being the manager and support team for the CS10K community. We're so excited to be here with you this evening. We have three fabulous guests who are going to present some terrific information about the LEAD CS toolkit that I think you all will find very useful in your schools and in your classrooms. But before I turn things over to them, I did want to provide a couple of things just to give you some background. One is that we really do hope that this can be a conversation. So you have the option of adding in questions, comments, etc. in the chat window. But we also hope that you'll consider calling in using the number, the conference number on the screen here, so that we can actually physically hear from you. We want to hear your voices, and we really encourage you to do that. If you do call in, we just ask that you mute your line. You can either mute it directly on your cell phone if you're calling in using that, or on the Adobe Connect toolbar at the very top, there's a phone icon, and you can just look at the drop-down menu and select Mute My Phone. And we just ask for folks to do that if you're not speaking directly, because, you know, background noise and things like that, I'm sure you're all either at home or might be in other places where there could be other noise around you. I'm going to be, again, my name is Melissa, and I'm going to be checking on things in the chat window. So if you run into any technical issues or anything, feel free to shoot me a note, and I'll be happy to help you. But otherwise, I'm going to be here really excited for this conversation. Using these tools from the leadcs.org site is truly, I was so excited to get a sneak peek of this and seeing the great work that our colleagues have been doing in Chicago and pulling together this information. There's three terrific folks that are here with us tonight. We have Sarah Willey, who's a senior researcher for Outlier Research and Evaluation at the University of Chicago. She has done tremendous work in the computer science education field. I won't read it all, but you can see here on the screen that she has a long record of supporting computer science teachers and computer science education writ large, and comes to us with a terrific background, and I know will bring tons of expertise to the group. She's also joined by her colleagues Michael Lack. Michael, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Michael is a director of STEM Policy and Strategic Initiatives for the Center for Elementary Mathematics and Science Education at the University of Chicago. He too brings tons of experience both from school districts as well as at the federal level and also at the university. So it's just fabulous that he could join us tonight and serve as a resource to us. And then finally, we have Amy Casada, who's a senior researcher with Outlier Research and Evaluation at the University of Chicago. And she's done a lot of work around conceptual frameworks and measurement tools and things of that nature. So we're excited to have all three of these folks here with us. Again, I'll be available, sticking around in the chat window, and can help, and we'll probably be asking some questions of my own. But I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Sarah, who will take things from here. So thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Melissa. So hi there, and thanks for making time to join the webinar this evening. We're certainly happy to have an opportunity to introduce this resource to the computer science education community. So there are several of us here from our LEAD CS Toolbox team, as you're aware. I'm joined by my colleagues Mike Locke and Amy Casada, and I also just want to mention that we have a fourth colleague who's worked on this project who's unable to join us tonight, and that's Jeanne Century, and she's the Director of Outlier Research and Evaluation. All right, so tonight our plan is to describe why the LEAD CS Toolbox exists, provide an overview for you of what it is, what we're talking about. We'll spend some time looking at a few examples of resources or tools in this toolbox. And then we'll touch on how you can help our team update and expand this toolbox. So don't worry, there'll be plenty of time at the end for you to ask questions or to provide us with some suggestions. And at that point, my colleagues Amy and Mike will turn on their microphones so that they can also join the conversation. Okay, so why the LEAD CS Toolbox? Well, very simply, as many of you on this webinar know, we need more computer science education at the K-12 level in schools, and really our collaborative ability to do that will depend in part on what leaders in schools and districts are really able to do. So school and district leaders play a really key role in increasing and improving computer science efforts, and many of them have little experience with computer science or have limited understanding of what computer science is, what computer science is not, maybe why it's important for students today, and certainly where they can look for answers to some of their very specific questions. So our development of the resources here really reflects what we as a team have learned from our research in computer science education, in work that we've done for a long time, research in K-12 mathematics and science education, and as well as our experience helping people lead various educational efforts. We also, as education researchers and folks who worked at the district level and in policy, we understand that change, and particularly change in educational settings, is really complex, and that to move toward, I think what our shared goal here is the CS10K community being, more computer science in schools, more quality computer science in schools. We really need to be able to provide some resources and supports that address some of the particular needs that districts and schools and teacher leaders have to help move all of that forward. All right, so a few details. This project was funded by the National Science Foundation. This was a one-year project, and the goal was really to create a toolbox or a website to house resources for education leaders, and particularly those leaders who might know very little about computer science education. And so these resources include original tools that we've developed, as well as linkages to already existing resources. So I've already started to describe what the toolbox is, a collection of resources or tools for education leaders. I do want to just point out that it's not a collection of instructional resources for use in the classroom. So it's not a classroom toolbox. This is very specifically a collection of resources to help education leaders grow and sustain computer science education efforts. So within the toolbox itself, our resources are organized by common topics and questions that education leaders have about computer science and that they would have really about any new educational program. We also include some leader stories. We call these pathways. And these are intended to illustrate how other education leaders have developed computer science in their schools and in their communities. These are really, we can see these voices of experience. And the final thing that I want to note here is that we provide direct links to existing computer science education resources that exist outside of this website, this toolbox. And just to expand on this last point a bit, we certainly recognize that there are many of these existing websites and resources out there devoted to supporting the growth of computer science education. And so our approach here was not to try and recreate or replace any of these really important resources, but rather we wanted to be able to direct users to these other sites and resources, and at the same time develop some original tools to support the needs and questions that have been identified by education leaders who we work with. So you could say this is an attempt to streamline the process, I guess, of searching for different kinds of information about how to even begin to think about computer science education. And, again, those of you who work in schools, you know that education leaders are incredibly busy, and they're, in most cases, being pulled in many different directions. And some leaders don't yet have a very strong grasp of, where they would need to begin to look for answers to some of the questions that they would have to address in thinking about building computer science into their districts and schools, or expanding on the offerings that they currently have. So the last thing that I want to point out here is that this toolbox is a work in progress. So we had funding from the National Science Foundation, and that really provided us with a starting point for development of this. And our plan now is to look for further funding so that we can refine and update these existing tools that we have and create new ones. And as we all know, it's a rapidly changing landscape, the computer science education landscape. So in a bit, I'll be asking those of you who are on this webinar to share some of your ideas for ways that we can do that, to update these tools and create new ones. keep this work moving forward. All right, so you already know on my side who's been involved in the project, but I also wanted to mention some of our key partners in this work. And as you can see here, that's included the Council of Chief State School Officers and the Council of Great City Schools. And both of these organizations and their members provided us with a lot of guidance and helped us with the outreach about this particular project and to garner feedback from some of the different members. And we also have a partner in Tata Consultancy Services who helps us think through and initiate the web development for this toolbox. Advice and guidance for this work also came from various members of the computer science education community and also leaders and members of organizations that are connected with computer science education efforts. Certainly you see there NCWIT, and then those that work with large numbers of school districts and teachers like Project Lead the Way and Teach for America. So the development process for the LEAD CS Toolbox involved a number of steps. So initially our team, we reviewed many existing online toolboxes or toolkits just to get a sense for what was included in some of these things. And this is a wide range of toolboxes that we looked at. So we looked at things that were specific to education, so for example, mathematics education improvement toolboxes. We looked at toolboxes advocating for healthy eating in schools. We looked at toolboxes that were intended to be resources for environmental disasters. So we really looked at a wide range of things that were called toolboxes or toolkits, and we wanted to look at them to think about what was included in them and how they were designed and how users might move through them. So we also did short interviews with education leaders to find out about some of their own questions and challenges in developing or maybe growing their computer science education opportunities in their schools. And we used this information along with many of our own ideas that are rooted in our experience as education researchers and some of us as policy leaders to begin to create a long list of questions around topics such as communication, curriculum, assessment, standards, partnership, equity, and many more. And at that point, we then reached out to our partner organizations and we asked them for input on the questions that they thought were the most important to address for district and school leaders. And with their feedback, finally we began to hone in on and develop some of these tools. So our partner organizations and advisor organization members and others were invited to then review and provide feedback on what we had developed in terms of tools. And these were eventually finalized and added to the site that you can see today. So just to jump back to that first step there that I talked about, when we reviewed other toolboxes to think about how we wanted to organize the information in our toolbox, we certainly were able to identify some of the key development points and some things that we liked, and certainly some things that we didn't seem to like so much about some of the other toolboxes that we saw out there. And we used that to help think through what we wanted to include in this toolbox, how we wanted to organize things. So for example, as we did these reviews, we learned that we realized it's important to minimize jargon as much as possible. We wanted to be certain to spend a good amount of time thinking through the navigation of the site, meaning how different users would move around and find resources that were the most relevant to them in this toolbox. We also realized that it was important to organize the information and resources in several different ways so that there were multiple entry points for users that could get to information in several different ways. We also noted that we wanted to articulate why we included each resource and how we envisioned it being used by potential users. And the last takeaway that I mentioned was that we realized that it was really crucial for us to highlight the stories of other education leaders as voices of experience in developing and growing computer science education opportunities, because really those are the most impactful ways to help people, I guess, think about how they can begin thinking about computer science education and growing it is by seeing how others who have already gone through that process have approached it and done it. Okay, so with that general background about the project itself and the development of the toolbox, we'll now jump in and take a look at some of these resources. All right, so this is a screenshot of what you see when you actually go to the leadcs.org site. And the next few slides that I'm going to share with you will walk you through the organizational structure of that site. And so since these are just screenshots, what you might want to do is pull up leadcs.org in your browser so that you can also be looking at some of these things in greater detail as I'm talking about them. Okay, so you can see here that we've highlighted some of the organizational structures in the site. So users can browse our list of common questions. You see at the top bar there it says Explore by Question. And these are questions that our partner organizations identified as being key for things that we should highlight in this, things that lots of education leaders have questions about. You can also look at our resources by tool name, so the names of the actual tools. Or you can read through our collection of, there's a section here called Leader Pathways. And these are stories, again, these are voices of experience. They describe key steps taken by teacher leaders, school leaders, district leaders, and partner organizations to really develop and support computer science in K-12 schools. Some steps in these pathways, as you read through them, they have an associated tool in the toolbox, but I'll talk more about that in just a bit. All right, so those are really the three main ways that you can make your way through resources at leadcs.org. The questions and the tool names, when you look in either of those views, everything that you see listed on the left-hand side there is organized by topics. So you can see those you've got in this clip. You can see communication, courses, equity, infrastructure, instructional resources, partnerships, rollout, standards, and outcomes. All right, and to give you a better sense of the difference between what you would see if you were to click on questions and what you would see if you were to click on tool name, here's just a side-by-side screenshot. Again, everything's organized by that common topic, but you can choose to search either via a question someone might have or the actual name of the tool. So for example, the first one you see listed, the question might be, what do you computer science acronyms mean? The name of the tool is simply Computer Science Education Acronyms. All right, so I clicked, this is an image of what would happen if you clicked on tool name. I click on the computer science terminology tool, and the first thing that I want to point out to you, this is what you see. For any tool that you click on, you will see some standard information for every tool. And that standard information is what you see at those red arrows there. So there's a short description about the tool. There is a section labeled why you need to know this, which is rather self-explanatory. And then there is a how does this tool help section. And this summarizes how we think the tool helps to address a specific question about developing or growing computer science education. So something else that I want to point out here in this slide is that tools come in really three different forms or formats. So some are a downloadable PDF like this one here. So you can see you have the standard information on the screen when you click on the tool name, but then you also have the option of clicking on the PDF below to actually open up and download the full tool if you determine that based on the information you see on the screen, this is a tool that's going to be useful to you or that you want to check out. So then we also have some tools that provide the information that you see here on the screen, but then they simply direct you to other resources that are out there. And so, like I mentioned before, we know that there are a lot of things that exist out there on the CSTA website, the NC website, many other websites. So instead of trying to recreate the wheel, we simply say, hey, here, go here. There are some great resources for you to use right there. So the last, I guess, format for some of our tools that I want to mention is that we have some tools where the entire content is just directly on the website, and it's in a printable format so that you just print directly from the website. There's no PDF for those types of tools, and I'll show you an example of all three of these in a moment. So again, with all three of them, you have the same categories of information. The idea with the PDF is that we're not going to force you to download the tool right away. Maybe it's not what you're looking for. You have an opportunity to read some of the information first and then make a decision. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at this particular tool, which is a PDF tool, and it's the computer science terminology tool. So the intent of this particular tool is to help address some of the confusion around computer-related terminology. And when we talk to education leaders in our partner groups, and we ask them what some of their biggest questions were, this was very frequently the #1 question that they said they would really appreciate having some type of a tool that they could use as a resource. So just to share a little insight into the development process for some of these tools, for this one in particular, this resource, it involves an extensive search for other resources out there describing different aspects of computing and computer-related terminology, and particularly those that education leaders unfamiliar with computer science may come across and need to be able to really understand the differences and similarities among some of those terms. And as many of you know, much of this terminology is pretty confusing, especially to those who don't have a deep computer science background. And very often, some of the computing words get used interchangeably, inappropriately by the media and anyone who's not familiar with some of the distinctions among terms. And this certainly adds to confusion in the K-12 education world about what constitutes computer science and what doesn't. And oftentimes computer scientists themselves have very different ideas about some of this terminology. So all of this really makes it a challenge to advocate for developing or growing computer science efforts. So this tool is an attempt to compile some of those definitions that are out there of computer-related terms, pulling from a wide range of resources. And some of these terms, again, if you go in and look at the tool, you can see that some of them include digital literacy, computational thinking, computer science, information and communication technology, computing, computer literacy, things like that. And the tool, so it summarizes these different definitions, but it also provides a list of all the sources that were used to compile the definitions by each term, so that you have an opportunity to go and look at those original resources, sources themselves for the term. All right, so the last thing I'll just mention about this tool is that there's also a section, basically a frequently asked questions section that compares and contrasts some of the computer-related terms, particularly those that can be difficult to differentiate, or that just simply sound similar, like computer literacy and computational literacy. All right, so I've jumped over to another tool. This one is called Resources for Promoting Computer Science. And as you can see, the format here for this tool is a bit different from the last one that we just looked at. As this is one of those tools that primarily points users to other existing advocacy resources. So this simply directs users to other resources that are out there. It's a fairly short and straightforward tool, so people can just go straight to other sites that have specifically what they're looking for. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about our leader pathways. So you've seen two of our different types of tools that have a different format, and this is our voice of experience piece. So most of the pathways that we have here, we have teacher leader pathways, we have district leader pathways, school leader pathways, and partner or stakeholder pathways. Now, we don't have many of these at this time, and we really want to develop this out because we think that these are really important. So we want to hear from you as well. If you have some pathways that you want to share with us, we would be happy to hear those. So all of these pathways have about 5 or 6 key steps that leaders took to start or strengthen computer science in their schools. And certainly if you attended the Monday CS10K webinar this week, you recognize this former teacher. And this is a description of the path that he took to get more computer science going in his school when he taught in Chicago. One of the things that I want to point out here is that if you do read through the key steps that these individuals take to move computer science forward in their districts or schools, you'll notice that there are links to tools in the toolbox that can help accomplish what's happening in that particular step. So, for example, you can see here, there's a reference to describing why computer science is important in schools, and there's also a hyperlink to a tool called Why Computer Science Education. And I'm going to jump over to that tool right now. When you click on that link, it'll take you right to the reference tool, and this is my last example of tool format in the LEAD CS toolbox. So let me look at a bigger picture. Okay, so this is a bit grainy, but the content of this particular tool, this is one of those tools where there's no PDF. All of the content exists just right there on the website. The content is printable from the website. And we use this format for some of our tools that were a little bit shorter and didn't really require a separate PDF download. So this particular tool summarizes some of the key arguments for why computer science education is important, you know, and certainly as being able to clearly articulate why computer science is needed is something that needs to be there to be able to successfully advocate for computer science. This is just another example of a tool, again, that has that, you know, printer-friendly content right on the website. This tool is also referenced in that teacher leader pathway that we just looked at. The focus of this particular resource is building strong partnerships to support computer science education efforts. This tool is also an example of recommendations that have been pulled together that were identified in an earlier NSF-funded study of STEM schools that we did here at Outlier. So these recommendations came out of interviews that we did with STEM school partners that were working to bring STEM education opportunities to students in their communities in Ohio. All right, so now that you have seen a sample of resources in the toolbox, and I hope that you have a sense for how the information is organized, the different ways that you can kind of move through the information, and the different types of formats that we use for the tools, I want to kind of just highlight some of the ways that we think people might use some of these tools. And then we want to hear, you know, what you think. We want to hear about how these tools can and should be used and what you think the next steps should be for the toolbox. So the first thing we have noted here is that, you know, we think that some of you might find that there are tools here that are a great source of information for you, or point you to existing resources maybe that you're less familiar with. So for example, I have listed here, one of these might be the resources for engaging students with disabilities in computer science tools. And this is one of those tools that pretty much points you to other resources. So it provides a number of links to the Access CS10K and the Access Computing resources that are out there out of the University of Washington. So the second thing we have listed here is, you know, we really encourage you to share some of these tools with others you know who may be less familiar with computer science education. You know, in many schools, guidance counselors are not familiar with the computer science education offerings in their school, or they may mistakenly advise some students against taking courses that they would actually greatly benefit from taking, you know, based on outdated ideas about who does and who does not typically take computer science courses, or what the content of those courses might be. And, you know, NCWIT has some great resources for helping address this problem. So our engaging guidance counselors and computer science tools direct users to those sources at the NCWIT site. So the last thing we have listed here is we think that you might consider sharing these resources with colleagues, stakeholders in schools and districts and cities and states who don't already have computer science education efforts underway. as these types of tools can be a real resource for them to really advocate for computer science. There are a variety of resources here to choose from depending on the specific need and intended audience to receive that message about how to develop and support computer science education efforts and why it's so important to do so. All right, finally we want to hear from you, the CS10K community. So what questions or suggestions do you have as we continue to seek out further funding, work on this toolbox, and as I said before, do you have a pathway story about how computer science education came to be in your school or your district that you would like to share with us? And with that, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to ask my colleagues, Mike and Amy, to go ahead and turn their microphones on so that we can collectively respond to questions that you may have as we move into this Q&A portion of the webinar. The last thing that I want to note is please do continue to type in questions and comments in the chat box, and Amy and Mike and I will continue to respond to some of those. You see there's an email here for the LeadCS website, info@leadcs.org. We'd be happy to hear from you here. Again, ideas about suggestions that you have, feedback that you have, stories that you want to share. So please make use of that. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to moving into our discussion section.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm so happy that you and your team could join us. I would just put another plug in here that I do encourage those of you that are on the phone line, if you have a question, you can feel free to raise it orally via phone. But I do see that there's one from Cheryl in the chat box about can teachers upload tools. So would one of you be able to address that for us?
Sure, this is Sarah. Hi, Cheryl. So Cheryl, that's a good question. Right now, no. Our toolbox is really, it's not an interactive place for people to upload resources that they have. That being said, we would be happy to hear from folks at that info@leadcs.org email address if they have some things that they think that we're missing or tools that they think we should figure out how to include. As I said before, this is just a starting point, and we're sure we've missed a lot of things, and that a lot of things have been developed even in just the time since we developed the tools and were able to design them, and we would like to be able to continually kind of update and include some of those things.
This is Melissa. I have a question I'd like to ask while others are typing in the chat window. I'm just curious. So if I'm a teacher and I'm just really not sure where to start, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, is there a particular resource or place on the site that you recommend that I go to kind of get started?
Ooh, that's a good question. Gosh, I would say just starting on at the first entry. The first page that you see or the screen that you see when you first move into the toolbox. And I would maybe start with the looking at it by questions and take a look at some of those categories and go through and see, are there some of those questions that you have too? Because we know that if you think about someone who's coming to computer science education for the first time, it can be pretty overwhelming. There's a lot. If you don't know anything about it, there are going to be a lot of questions, and it can be difficult to know where to start. So, looking at some of those questions, I would also recommend looking at reading through the stories in the leader pathways, because those are really concrete examples of ways that schools and districts and teachers have made computer science education happen in their communities. So that's also a great place to start.
Thanks so much. That's super helpful. Let's pause a few more minutes. It looks like Jason has a question about, do you have a plan for keeping the links up to date pointing to other resources. What's your strategy for that? That's definitely always an issue that we all have to deal with when websites.
Yes, it is. You know, and to some extent, this goes back to, you know, one of my initial comments about, you know, continuing to look for funding opportunities so that we can continue to keep the site active and up to date and really flesh it out a lot more. That's our plan. That's our intent to do that. And if anyone has suggestions about ways that places to look for funding to help us make that happen, that would be greatly appreciated. I don't know, Mike, Amy, do you guys have anything you want to add there?
No, this is Amy. I agree with what Sarah said. We have gotten a few folks, some of our partner organizations, to look at the tools in the toolbox, and from that feedback, we have already begun updating some of the links because we created these tools over the past year. So some of them, like the bandwidth tool, bandwidth requirements and bandwidth initiatives are constantly changing. So at least on that tool, I just made some revisions this week. But yeah, in the long term, we are going to need more funding.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that, Amy. Thank you. You know, those of you who are on this webinar, we're happy. Again, please do check things out and give us your feedback. That's a great opportunity for us to hear from you and to learn from you. And certainly, you know, if your eyes catch a link that's out of date or anything along those lines, we would be so grateful to hear from you so that we can go ahead and make some of those changes. Yeah, the landscape is constantly changing, and it's a challenge to keep up.
Any other questions from the group? Well, if you're like me, I'm sure there's lots that you probably want to go and see and explore on the leadcs.org site. And so you may not have too many questions as of yet, but I'm sure that Sarah and team are welcome to stick around for a few more minutes to see if there's any other questions that surface. But I did want to just very quickly give a plug for a couple of items that are coming up with the CS10K community. One is that if you're not already a member, we hope you'll join us. If you just go to cs10kcommunity.org, you can apply for a membership. There's usually a quick turnaround time in approving those, and then we'll hope you get started and can be part of another community where you can use that as access for support. We have the Lead CS site is terrific for resources in terms of documents and tools and information, but the CS10K community can provide that network of people that's often so important, especially as we mentioned earlier, for computer science teachers who struggle in isolation in their buildings. We also hope that you'll follow us on Twitter at CS10K and follow the CS10K hashtag. We do host monthly Twitter chats. They're going to be held on the fourth Monday of every month. We will be chatting on 12/28. That's during the break, but I'm sure that some of you, if you're like me, could probably use even a little break from family and holiday things, etc. So we're going to be chatting on the 28th about emergencies and mishaps that you may encounter as a computer science teacher. So we'll hope you'll join us for that. And then next week, of course, is CS Ed Week. The whole country is going to be celebrating from December 7th through the 13th. We're issuing a photo challenge where we're asking folks to share with us how they're celebrating for the week. I'm going to put a URL here in the chat window where you can go and find more information. Essentially what we're asking people to do is just share. You can either upload it directly on our website, or you can share a photo via Instagram or Twitter using the CS Ed Week photo challenge hashtag. And then we're selecting some winners throughout the week. So it's a great way you can earn, we'll have daily random drawings for Amazon gift cards, and then a public voting for a larger gift card at the end. So it's a great way to get some resources for your classrooms. But we're glad that you're here with us and you were able to join us tonight. Like I said, I'm sure Sarah and team will be happy to stick around for a few more minutes if there's anything else that you have questions with. But with that, we'll end our formal discussion and look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, I guess, which actually will be next CS10K community webinar won't be until January. So if I don't speak to you before then, I hope you have a great end of December. I can't believe we're already saying that, but great end of the year and great start to 2016. So thank you, everyone. And special thank you to the Lead CS team from the University of Chicago and our friends there for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Melissa. We appreciate being part of your webinar series, and certainly thank you to all of you who have joined us this evening. We will be online for a few more minutes, and again, please, we want to hear from you, so make use of that email address as you start to make your way through some of our resources in the toolbox. Thank you.